Any questions? Well, I'm sure there are, but they can come later. Let's watch the clip. And the same as the BBC clip, I just want you to think about, this is a very different understanding of the Gaza problem right now. I want you to think about, what is the difference with the BBC clip? Is it more truthful? Is it more objective? Is it biased? Yeah? How does it affect you personally? Yeah? Because we all know what the BBC does. We know how it reports, but this is slightly different. Because this guy, strictly speaking, is not even a journalist. But here we go.
We Europeans are responsible for these atrocities in Gaza. And my question to my friends, especially in Germany, who object to the use of the term genocide for what's happening in Rafah as we speak, is this. For how long are you going to permit your guilt over the Holocaust to justify, to legitimize, and to weaponize the genocide of the Palestinian people? How many rivers of Palestinian blood need to flow before you feel cleansed of your guilt over the Holocaust? We have to stop sitting on the fence, because that makes us complicit in a crime against humanity. The Israeli right has managed to hide behind the specter of the Holocaust with immense efficiency, to co-opt social democrats, liberals, progressives, anti-fascists, in a manner that their own fascism, the fascism of the Zionist right, of the Netanyahus, of Likud, they've succeeded in effectively gaining immunity. In Germany today, you can only talk about genocide if you support it. Israeli ministers are completely free to talk about a greater Israel from the river to the sea. That's genocide of the Palestinians. But if you oppose the genocide, you cannot talk about it. And that is all done under the cloak of identifying anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. Once upon a time, that would not have been possible. Once upon a time, Willy Brandt, the Social Democrat Chancellor in Germany, or Bruno Kreisky, the equivalent in Austria, talked very sensibly about the need, on the one hand, to support the Jews' right to live in peace and without fear of anti-Semitism, in a manner that is balanced out by Palestinian rights. Today, that is simply not possible. Our leaders in the West have to understand that they cannot be liberal, they cannot be democratic, if they support the idea of an exclusively Jewish state. What would they say if I were to support an exclusively Greek Orthodox Greece? I think that I would be immediately denounced as anti-European, anti-liberal, anti-democratic, a xenophobe. Bear that in mind. For centuries, we Europeans, the Germans or the British, we have collectively persecuted the Jewish people. We have effected one pogrom after the next. And then at some point, we, the powers that be in Europe, decided that this is a time to farm out the Jews to a land which was declared empty, along with the Zionist ideology. Zionism started with a slogan, a land without a people, for a people without a land. That harks back to white settlement. When the British disembarked in today's New South Wales in Australia, they declared Australia to be terra nullius, an empty land. By assumption, the Aborigines, the natives, were not humans. And then they proceeded towards their genocide to take over the land. The Zionist slogan, a land without a people, is again the first step towards the dehumanization of natives and essentially a proclamation of a genocide. We Europeans need to take responsibility for what is happening across the land of Palestine, from the river to the sea. I don't care about what kind of state solution we have. Universal human rights from the river to the sea, for the Jews, for the Palestinians, for the Bedouins, for everyone. The manner in which the Western media have been presenting in juxtaposition the war in Palestine, the massacre in Palestine, because there isn't even a war, this is just straightforward massacre, with the war in Ukraine. It is as if they wanted to put on display their toxic cynicism and hypocrisy. When a hospital is bombed in Mariupol, which you should condemn, that is a crime against humanity. When Putin switches off the electricity supply in Ukraine, it is a crime against humanity.
Are we really going to sit by watching these appalling war crimes being committed? Are we going to watch innocent civilians being slaughtered? Or are we going to do something to actually stop Putin and stop him soon?
When a hospital gets bombed in Gaza City, in self-defense, it was inevitable. What can we do? The inevitable repercussion of the Palestinians being killed. When Israel switches off the water supply, not even the electricity supply, the water supply, the press present this as the inevitable solidarity of the West to Israel.
There are 2.3 million people squeezed into a 32-mile stretch of land without power, without water, without food. You cannot deprive the Israelis and Netanyahu of the urge for revenge. They are going to take awful revenge. You cannot blame the Israelis. And I'll tell you what they're going to do.
That's the mainstream
They're
view
going
right
to
there.
take them to a car park.
You can,
For centuries,
this is shocking, right?
known that the powerful like to discriminate between fashionable victims and unfashionable victims. The victims of our friends and the victims of our enemies. But never before have we had a global media campaign for violating the very basic principles of truth-telling and genuine reporting of facts on the ground. The West talks about total victory of Israel and total victory of Ukraine. There can be no total victory in either battlefield. A sane humanity would pause and think about the rationality of never-ending wars. All these hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars, euros and British pounds that are being spent on bombs, shells, rockets, drones, bullets, grenades that are killing children as we speak, both in Gaza but also in Ukraine, is testimony to the gross rationality of our species, and in particular of the system of government that we have, which allows these decisions to be taken without any consultation of the people. Because I have no doubt that if the British people, if the German people, if the Russian people, if the American people were consulted, there is no chance in hell that they would condone this kind of experiment.
Believe that.
And we should realize that never-ending wars are the objective of arms dealers and of politicians like Netanyahu, like Putin, who do not want the war to end for one simple reason, because they will cease to be leaders of these corrupt regimes. Moody's recently downgraded Israel's credit rating. It's not going to make a difference today or tomorrow. But I remember the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Those of us who were calling for a boycott, a series of sanctions and divestment, we were being met with derision. And I remember Barclays, Ford, and the whole of the financial sector in the city of London doing its utmost.
It's so important that he makes that historical comparison. So when South Africa had apartheid, the Western governments were supporting the white South African government economically and politically. And historically, democratically, we turned that over, right? So it's very important to realise when people shrug their shoulders and say, what can we do about Palestine? There's a lot we can do about Palestine. Right? So, my active audience friends, what did you think about that text? Do you agree with it? Do you reject it? Do you negotiate it?
Amazing. Honestly, I feel like this text that we were talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah. You know, it's amazing, and I feel like it's been a while since we've seen someone that says the blunt truth without having to sugarcoat anything and just say it as it is. Because I do believe when it comes to certain circumstances like what's happening in Gaza right now, there is only one truth.
Yeah.
You cannot beat around the bush.
I think so.
There's only one truth, and it's basically what he's been telling.
So you regard this text as more truthful, so you have a dominant reading?
Yeah.
Yeah? Anybody else?
I would agree with Asma. I think the earlier BBC news that we watched, it was a lot of emotions, and I do agree all that was happening, but I think even if they didn't have to show that emotion, we know what's happening there. We know what's all the bombing, and we know it's causing death. If they show that when we know deep within what's happening there in Gaza,
Yeah.
we're doing nothing about it. This is like an eye-opener.
And he makes the historical context.
Yes.
That's the most
And that's
important
got to be, look, news is the rough draft of history. If there's no history in news, it's not what purpose is it serving?
Yeah.
And, you know, so anybody else want to say something?
I want to say something. I want to question the history because he related the Holocaust with the behavior Israel people do. Because during the Second World War,
Yeah.
what did Jewish people do to the German? But what did the Palestine people do to Israel? I
Mhm.
think it's not comparable.
Okay, it's an interesting point. So what do you mean specifically that makes it not comparable?
Yeah, I think it's not comparable because the background is not same. But if people relate the Holocaust to Israel, what they are doing today, it's not fair.
Do you think that the Second World War was fair?
No.
So why is it not similar?
Because Jewish people didn't do like kill or attacked German during the Second World War.
Correct.
But now in what's that, 7th October,
Yeah,
there's something happened because I think it's Gaza, Hamas
yeah,
attacked Israel first.
yeah.
So I think compare these two history is not fair.
Okay, does
Okay.
anybody want to come back on that? What do
Now I
you-
got your point.
Pardon?
No, now I got your point, what you're
Yeah,
trying to say.
does anybody want to answer her point or?
But what do you mean by it's not fair?
Because I mean in the World War II, Jewish people didn't do any harm thing to the German. So but German do the Holocaust to the Jewish people.
Okay.
But if this situation compared to now, Israel people, yes, they are attacking Palestine, but Palestine attacked Israel like in October 7th.
Yes.
So it's not. I'm not saying Israel is innocent, but there's something happened in the history. So I'm not supporting any side, but I think compare these two facts is not fair.
I think I'm going to say a couple of things. So, firstly, I would say it's an interesting point, and I think there are differences. If that's the point. But I would argue, playing devil's advocate, that the similarities outweigh them in this case. And the key point that Varoufakis is trying to put across, I would say, is to do with guilt. Yeah. So what he's saying is that the Israeli government, in the name of Zionism, they're saying we are the victims. So it's kind of victim signalling, which now you mentioned very particularly that kind of mainstream narrative that the war began on the 7th of October. It didn't. It didn't. There were many atrocities by Israelis on Palestinians leading up to the 7th of October last year. So, but you can be forgiven for thinking that because the mainstream narrative doesn't tell you
Yeah.
about the historical background. But perfect example there, actually, Lin Shu, of how easily the media can limit your perspective. I think your perspective is valid. There are differences. We mustn't assume they're the same. But what's in common is genocide.
Yeah.
They're both. So genocide was performed on millions of Jewish people died as a result of Nazi genocide. Not millions, but that, so far at least 30,000 Palestinians have been genocidally massacred. And that, we must not say, oh, there's a difference and therefore we ignore the fact that 30,000 people are being killed. That's the danger of that argument. I don't think that's what your argument is, but some people might understand it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, you are the audience. You can't be wrong. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Don't you think it's so incredible that, for me, and I'm guessing for you too, that if you didn't know about these other voices, about what's really going on, you can't blame audiences for having the wrong impression about how easily we can be misled by the mainstream mass media. How powerful the media is. in shaping our interpretation of what's going on overseas.
I do agree, but I do believe that we have a responsibility to do investigation and do our research.
Absolutely.
Better understand everything that's happening.
Absolutely, and I think in line with what you're just saying there, Asma, Yanis Varoufakis, he's very powerful, he's very strong, he's very brave. He doesn't have the truth, and I think that's what Lynch is kind of saying. It's like, let's be critical here. Let's, just because he's saying big, powerful things,